The 5th century BCE was a time when the ancient world didn't run on international law or diplomacy. It operated under the absolute will of one man, the King of Kings, the Shahanshah. To the Persians, the Achaemenid Empire wasn't just a nation, it was a divine entity, a colossal shadow stretching from the rising sun to its setting, swallowing everything in its path. Everything the light touches belongs to the crown, they whispered in the halls of Persepolis. To defy the great king is to defy the gods themselves. But history has a way of producing a discordant note. At the empire's western fringe lay a rugged, impoverished, and fractured land, Greece. To the Persians, the Greeks were nothing more than a collection of stubborn barbarians clinging to their rocky shores. Why do they resist? The satraps mocked. We offer them order, wealth, and the peace of the grave. Yet, in those dusty olive groves, a concept was being born that would alter the destiny of mankind forever: liberty. How did an empire wielding the legendary immortals, an army that seemed to flow like an endless black tide, fall before these tiny city-states? This isn't just a story of bronze shields and iron spears. This was a collision of two irreconcilable worlds. On one side stood absolute submission at the feet of a god-king. On the other, the unbreakable will of free citizens ready to burn it all down to protect their home. The stage was set, a clash between the weight of an empire and the fire of a free soul. In 490 BCE, Darius the Great sent his emissaries to Greece with a single, chilling demand: earth and water, the ultimate symbols of absolute surrender. The Athenians didn't just refuse, they hurled the messengers into a deep well. You want earth and water, they spat. Find it at the bottom. It wasn't just a rejection, it was the loudest declaration of war in human history. Fast forward to the plains of Marathon. The Persians brought their legendary archers, the gold standard of warfare. In their minds, the bow was the ultimate weapon, a way to erase an enemy from a distance without ever getting blood on their hands. They expected the Greeks to cower. Instead, the Athenians countered with a piece of tactical insanity: they ran. Imagine the sight, with 10,000 Greek hoplites, encased in 70 pounds of bronze, closing the 1,500-meter gap at a full-speed sprint. They are madmen, the Persian commanders laugh.
Move faster!
They run toward their own graves. But the Greeks knew the math. If they stayed still, they were just target practice for a storm of Persian arrows. When the two lines finally collided, it wasn't a fight, it was a car crash. The sheer kinetic energy of Greek bronze shattered Persian wicker shields and linen armor like glass. Marathon was more than a tactical victory. It was a brutal lesson to the ancient world that discipline and raw courage can bridge any gap in the As the Persian fleet retreated, they left behind more than just bodies. They left behind their aura of invincibility. For the first time, the world realized that even gods could bleed. 10 years passed, but the wound at Marathon never healed. In 480 BCE, Xerxes I, son of Darius, returned with an ambition that defied the gods. The historian Herodotus claimed his army was so vast, they literally drank entire rivers dry as they marched. To crush Greece once and for all, this tidal wave of iron and flesh had to funnel through a narrow mountain pass, the hot gates of Thermopylae. Standing in their way was Leonidas. This wasn't a king who commanded from a golden throne. He was a warrior king who stood in the blood and dust of the front line, the beating heart of the phalanx. Surrender your weapons, Xerxes' messengers demanded, looking at the tiny Greek force. Leonidas didn't flinch. He just spat back two words that still echo through history: Mol and Labe, come and take them. History remembers the 300 Spartans, but in reality, about 7,000 other Greek allies stood with them. Yet, the 300 were the iron soul of the resistance. They weren't just soldiers, they were a biological machine of war, bred to never retreat and programmed to never surrender. If the Persian arrows darken the sun, one Spartan joked, then we shall fight in the shade. Thermopylae became a masterclass in geography as a weapon. In that suffocatingly narrow pass, Xerxes' numerical advantage vanished. He couldn't throw a million men at them. He could only send a few hundred at a time into the Spartan meat grinder. Wave after wave of Persian elite shattered against the bronze wall. Xerxes eventually won the battle, but he lost the war. The sacrifice of Leonidas bought the one thing Greece needed most: time. Time to unite, time to breathe, and time to realize that a king god could be defied. It was a tactical defeat, but a strategic masterstroke that set the world on fire. After the bloodbath at Thermopylae, the Persian juggernaut rolled south, and Athens was put to the torch. Standing on the heights of the Acropolis, Xerxes watched the city burn and believed the war was over. He thought he had broken the Greek spirit. But the Athenian general Themistocles had one last, desperate card to play, a naval gamble in the narrow straits of Salamis. "Let them come," Themistocles whispered as he looked at the horizon. "Their size will be their tomb." Picture this: the massive Persian fleet, a forest of towering, gilded masts, lured into a death trap. It was like forcing a titan into a narrow alleyway. The great ships couldn't turn, they couldn't maneuver, and they began to collide with one another in a chaotic tangle of wood and screaming men. "They have too many ships," a Greek sailor might have worried. Themistocles' reply: "Good. More targets." The Greek triremes weren't just transport ships, they were 170-man-powered wooden missiles. Armed with massive bronze rams below the waterline, they didn't just fight, they hunted. They slammed into the Persian flanks, with splintering like dry bone as the sea rushed in. High above on a mountaintop throne, Xerxes sat and watched in horror as his dreams of world domination were dragged to the bottom of the sea by a man he considered a peasant. Salamis was the point of no return. Without his fleet to resupply the army, Xerxes' massive ground force was suddenly stranded and starving in a hostile land. The Persian dream of conquering Europe didn't just fail, it evaporated in the salt spray of the Mediterranean. The tide of history had officially turned. More than a century passed, but history has a long memory. Revenge didn't come from Athens or Sparta, it came from the rugged north, Macedonia. Alexander the Great. If the previous wars were about defending liberty, the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BCE was about executing an era. "The world is not big enough for two sons," Alexander famously declared. He wasn't there to push the Persians back, he was there to take it all. Darius III of Persia played it smart, or so he thought. He chose a vast, flat plain at Gaugamela, perfectly leveled so his scythed chariots and massive cavalry could shred the Macedonians to pieces. He had every tactical advantage. But Alexander possessed the one thing the Persians had lost over a century of luxury: absolute, cold-blooded decisiveness. While the dust choked the air and the roar of thousands filled the valley, Alexander spotted it, a tiny, flickering gap in the Persian line. He didn't send a messenger, he didn't wait for a signal. He personally led his companion cavalry in a thunderous, wedge-shaped charge straight at Darius's throat. It was a psychological dagger. "Look at your king," the Macedonians screamed. When the King of Kings turned his chariot and fled in terror, the spirit of a 200-year-old empire collapsed under his retreating wheels. The Achaemenid Empire didn't fall because it was weak, it fell because it was a relic.
Run back to your palace
it was a giant built on fear and sheer numbers, an old machine in a new world.
Chariot around! Fall back!
The Greeks and Macedonians thrived on innovation, flexibility, and the audacity to imagine the impossible. Looking back, these weren't just massacres in the sand. They were the forge fires of Western civilization. Without the miracle at Marathon or the defiance at Salamis, the blueprints of our modern world, our politics, our philosophy, our very concept of self, would have been erased before they were even written. The shadow of the great king was long, but the fire of a few free men proved brighter.